Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 820B, and today's date is November 17th, 2015, and the title of this episode is U.S. just shifted to plan whatever to remove Assad from Syria. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, the U.S. government central bankers, they need two things to keep control of the people, to keep control of the narrative of the stories they tell. And one of them is being the creation of currency, which they do have. The central bank creates the currency out of thin air. They also need control of information. Right now, they control the corporate media. They tell them exactly what to say, when to say it. Most of it's scripted. The one thing they don't have control of is the internet, the independent media, alternative media, the new media, whatever you like to call it. And we understand that there are certain regulations coming down the pike. We understand TPP is going to push these regulations further to take away the right for people to have certain websites to report on certain news stories. And we see already that the FCC, with their open internet order, the commissioner, Ajit Pai, he admits that broadband providers have the ability and they could ban free speech or block speech they don't approve of. There are currently about 34 broadband providers in the U.S., and the commission ominously warned that threats to internet openness remain today. The broadband providers hold all the tools necessary to deceive consumers, degrade content, or disfavor the content that they don't like, and that the FCC continues to hear concerns about other broadband providers' practices involving blocking or degrading third-party applications. Now, what the commissioner failed to say is that broadband providers have a monopoly on the subscribers. And the FCC didn't provide any type of specific guidance or anything. And basically, he's acting as a referee and is really not going to do anything because people will have to make their case of why they are blocking. Now, if we look at the corporations, we can see they're under the control and they're intertwined into the government. And this is part of fascism. And we can see already the government is using the USA Freedom Act to have the corporations hand over the personal information from every single person to help with cyber attacks, which we know is absolutely ridiculous, and will not hold these companies liable. They can also turn around and say to these service providers, listen, under the U.S. government, we want you to, look at who's saying what, and we want you to block certain things, which has been done. This is nothing new. Now, a Supreme Court justice came out and spoke to Drudge, and he said your days are numbered. And we hear a call from certain senators saying that you just can't say whatever you want on the internet, and we're going to stop you. I mean, it's very easy for these corporations to do this because all they have to do is say, that's offensive, and they can take it down. Now, what's offensive to one person might not be offensive to another, but they are the gatekeepers for this. And we can see the United States government central bankers, through political correctness, they're trying to convince us that all of these things that we're saying are offensive to someone. And if it's offensive to someone, then it needs to come down. And this is how they're going to push the idea of controlling the internet and the new media and internet and the independent media. And they're going to continually push this as hard as they possibly can. Now, we see out in China, there is another explosion at a Chinese chemical facility at Yonying. And we're seeing this happen quite often lately. And we know that China is getting ready to have the IMF include their yuan renminbi in the basket of currencies. And this could be a message from the United States saying, listen, back off of this right now. Remember, the U.S. was very concerned of China having their yuan renminbi included in the basket of SDRs, and they kind of stopped this from happening. This time around, I'm not too sure that they're going to stop it because we're heading down a path where the economy is really now accelerating and collapsing, and they are under a time schedule here to get this event started. We already see the beginning stages of what they're going to try to do here, and I think they're just going to ramp this up because they realize the economy of the private Western Central Bank countries, they are completely falling apart, and they are running out of time, and they're running out of ways to keep this thing propped up. Out in Ukraine, we see that Ukraine is defaulting, and the IMF is willing to change their regulations to loan money to a country that is defaulting on another country's debt. And they want Russia to restructure their debt, and Russia's saying no. What they'll do is they'll extend the payoff debt, but they're not going to restructure at this point. And of course, Kiev is saying, listen, if you don't do this, we're going to default on your debt. And it's funny because with Greece, they didn't want to talk about restructuring whatsoever. They didn't change their rules. They wanted Greece to take on another bailout, and they wanted their payment. And what we're seeing right now is the IMF, the central bankers, doing one thing for one country and doing another for another country. And of course, they want to keep Ukraine alive because they're getting ready for a major offensive. Out in Libya, we are seeing there is a new UN Libyan envoy. And remember, the last Libyan envoy was corrupt, taking orders from Saudi Arabia, and they got rid of him. Now this new one is going to come in, and this person is going to try to revive the talks of having a unity government. And at the same time, the UN puts out a warning that the Islamic State in Libya have consolidated control over the central Libyan lands. And basically, they are carrying out horrific atrocities in Libya. They are gaining more and more territory. And we can see why this is happening at this point. The U.S. already came in and bombed this area. Now the UN is giving a report that the Islamic State is taking over Libya. We see the same situation right now that we're seeing in Iraq and Syria, making the case of why the U.S. needs to go into Libya. Now, Saudi Arabia is continually bombarding Yemen with bombings, and the U.S. State Department now has signed off on the deal to sell $1.29 billion worth of smart bombs to Saudi Arabia. And the 22,000 bombs are to be used in the Saudis' military campaign in Yemen. They're saying that, listen, we need to make sure that the Royal Saudi Air Force don't run out of weapons. They make sure that they have sufficient weapons stocks for military action in Yemen and for Syria. So that is a lot of bombs for these two countries. 22,000. And we can see right now that Saudi Arabia is continually bombing hospitals. And remember, the U.S. is orchestrating all of this. Saudi Arabia is a proxy army for the United States. Now, Spain has issued an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over the 2010 Gaza flotilla attack. And they also issued an arrest warrant for 7 other former and current government officials. If they set foot into Spain, they will be arrested. This is coming from Spanish National Court Judge José de la Mata. He ordered the police and civil guard to notify him if Mr. Netanyahu and 6 other individuals enter the country. Better be careful. This could be a country where the Islamic State attacks. Now, we understand there is a huge, huge refugee problem. This was orchestrated by the United States government central bankers. And Turkey has released these refugees onto Europe. This is to put Europe into chaos, to bring Europe together, to bring Europe to war. And we see a lot of the European nations are not keeping their borders open. They're closing their borders. They're erecting fences, saying that this is absolutely ridiculous. In each country, there are squabbles and arguments of what is going on here. Here in the United States, the president has promised that he'll be bringing in these refugees into the United States. And already the governors of 27 states have said, absolutely not. We are not going to accept these refugees. Now remember, the U.S. government has caused this problem in the Middle East. Turkey has been collecting these refugees. The U.S. has been funding Turkey to keep the refugees until they hit a certain number and until they were needed. And all these refugees are not just from Syria. Actually, a limited number is from Syria. Most of them are from Yemen, Libya, Lebanon, Iraq, all the places where the U.S. went into these countries and removed the elected governments and put a puppet government in place. The countries are destroyed. Economies are suffering. And here in the United States, states like Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Illinois, Indiana, all saying absolutely not. And the list goes on and on and on. Now, there are states that say, yes, we will accept them. Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Pennsylvania, Vermont, Washington. And we see this is turning into a huge, huge problem. Now, the question is, why does the U.S. want all the refugees coming into this country? And I have no problem with people entering this country. I don't like it when the government uses it for their specific agenda. And they cause the problem in the first place. And all of this is being done, just like the illegal immigrants coming over the border, is to help the corporate and central banker agenda. That is what this is for. They get working permits. They can take out student loans. They can take out auto loans. They can work for corporations for very low wages, so they're not hit with the penalties from Obamacare. So the corporations like this. And eventually, when they become citizens, they go right onto Obamacare. This is the plan from the beginning. Now, we know that the Islamic State attacked France, which we know is the proxy army for the U.S., and we know this was a false flag. But let's go with the official story. And the French government went off and basically attacked Syria. Now, coming from a commander of France's anti-Islamic State operation, said that, no, we've been preparing for a French military assault inside Syria for weeks now. This has nothing to do with the attacks in France, but the corporate media is out there trying to convince everyone that, yeah, this is all part of the same thing. No, they also sailed their aircraft carrier, Charles de Gaulle, that already left port. This was all planned. Now, because of all of this, President Hollande is continually calling for war, and he's bringing the French Parliament together, and he wants a state of emergency extended by 3 months. And he also wants to change the Constitution. He wants to create a new version of exceptional measures, giving the government some emergency powers available under martial law. So he says his proposals are minor, that if something should happen, all the power will go to him. And, his powers will last for a certain period of time where he'll have full control of everything. They also want to basically allow them to throw out and revoke people's citizenship if they're foreigners and they're in the country and they're tied to terrorism or they believe they're part of terrorism. So they can just throw people out of the country. And we can see most of the countries are going to go down this line. This is what they are doing because they realize eventually they're going to have to declare martial law in each one of these countries because the economies of the private West and Central Bank countries are falling apart and collapsing. And right now, because of this attack in France, this false flag attack, this was to get the EU nations together to go to war. Right now, France has invoked an EU Treaty Collective Defense article requesting military help from its European partners in response to the terror attack in Paris. EU officials say the mutual defense article is being used for the first time. The assistance would come from 28 European partners under Article 42.7 of the EU's Lisbon Treaty, which outlines mutual defense among the EU members, which is called the Mutual Defense Clause. And the article reads that if any EU country is the victim of armed aggression on its territory, the other member states shall have toward it an obligation of aid and assistance by all means in their power, in accordance with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. So here we have the call for all the European nations to come together to go to war. This is what it's all about. This is what they're pushing for. And all of this was done on purpose. Meanwhile, we see France is hitting the city of Raqqa, where the Islamic State stronghold is. And we know right now, most likely they're not bombing the Islamic State. Still, Russia, they fired their missiles from the Mediterranean, their ballistic missiles, into Raqqa also, hitting their targets. A lot of the different neighborhoods and provinces of Aleppo are celebrating because they have been liberated from the proxy army of the United States, and they're very happy they're back under government control. Now, the U.S. has sent a second batch of ammo, and this time they promise it is going to the Free Syrian Army, or the Syrian Arab Coalition, or the Syrian Democratic Coalition, whatever their rebranded name is today. It's the same thing. They're sending the ammunition, the weapons, to the Islamic State. And of course, this time they promise, cross their heart, that it's really going to them. But we know the Free Syrian Army is a fictional army. Yes, there's a couple out in hotels waiting to take over once Assad is removed. But the people on the ground fighting, they're Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, and other terrorist groups. But they're trying to convince everyone that they're playing fairly right now and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, which we know is a complete lie. Yesterday, Putin came out and he said, listen, we have satellite imagery. Pictures have been all over the internet. We can see the convoy of oil trucks. Why hasn't the U.S. gone in there and destroyed the oil trucks? Well, of course, yesterday they went in and they did this because the information was out there. Putin is calling them on it, and they said, oh, we're hitting it. Today, they're coming up with the story of why they haven't been hitting the oil convoy, which funds the Islamic State, their proxy army. And Washington right now is blaming all of this on Assad, that he has undermined the U.S. efforts to cut off the Islamic State funding. The terrorists remain well-heeled due to crude oil trade, and they're saying that Assad is to blame. We just couldn't hit that huge convoy of trucks. I mean, this is ridiculous already. They're playing the blame game, and the reason why they're coming up with this is because they're supporting the Islamic State. They wanted them to be funded by the oil. Who's getting the oil? Let's see. The Treasury has the ability to sanction countries and individual people with what's going on. They know how much the Islamic State is making, but they can't figure out how to stop the long convoy of oil trucks, and they can't figure out where millions and millions of gallons of oil being sold to countries. They can't figure this one out. It's just mind-boggling. And this is how you know that all of this is completely fake, phony, and false. Now, Kerry is out there saying that they're going to be closing the borders with Turkey. They're going to help them. Right now, it's like 78% closed. They're going to push it so they cut the northern border off from Syria. Well, it's amazing how the U.S. can go in and help Turkey close the borders, but in the United States, they have a problem with closing the borders. They can't protect them. But in Turkey, not a problem. And what they're actually going to do is they're going to say, listen, we close the borders. It is not helping. We need some type of safe zone. And they're going to push this and make a zone between Syria and Turkey. This is the case they're going to try to make at this point. And John Kerry and Obama, they're both out there trying to say that the Islamic State is losing territory. We know Obama said they're contained. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to say that everything the Russians are doing, they're trying to take credit for. Now, we know before Russia was in there, the Islamic State was gaining territory because the plan was to go after Assad. And I showed numerous times on the maps of how the Islamic State expanded their territory. Now Russia is pushing them eastward, out of Damascus, past Aleppo. Now they're in Raqqa. And we can see right now, Kerry is out there saying that, yeah, ISIS is losing territory because they don't want anyone to realize what's really going on here. So they're trying to take credit for what Russia is doing right now. But don't worry, they have big plans. Kerry is saying there is a big transition coming. And they're saying within the next 6 months. John Kerry has given an upbeat assessment of prospects for diplomatic efforts to end the war in Syria and the fight with the Islamic State, saying a ceasefire between Assad and the rebels fighting to overthrow him could now be just weeks away. And they're saying that they're going to have elections and they're going to sign all of this. The only problem, Syrians aren't invited to take part in this event. I mean, they're talking to Saudi Arabia. They're talking to all the other players except the main player. Now, Putin said, and Lavrov have come out and said, listen, Assad's not going to step down. The people are going to have to decide. And the U.S. right now, within the 6-month time period, they are not going to let the people of Syria vote. This would be a huge mistake because last election, he received 87% vote for him to become president. This time, with the help of Russia, he brought Russia into Syria. They removed the Islamic State. How do you think the people are going to vote this time? They will never let this happen. What John Kerry is saying, they have something planned in the next 6 months. Now, out in Paris, in France, we understand this false flag event was put there and it was done on purpose to put fear in people, to remove rights of people, and a lot of it was fake, phony, and false, as false flags go. I mean, they found the Syrian passport. Right now we're finding out that the identity of the person in the passport is a dead Syrian soldier. We found out the perpetrators weren't refugees. They lived in France. They lived in Belgium. And of course they were patsies. And we can see that this was a completely made up attack. Now Putin has finally come out and said, yes, what brought down the Metrojet was a bomb and it was done by terrorism. Now I think he waited for this. And we can see the U.S. and the coalition forces use this. And they were hoping that they were going to scare the Russian people in having their government pull out, saying, listen, we don't want any more terrorism. Ever since we went into Syria, look what happened. So Putin turned this around. He waited. He didn't let the information out. And now he let it out right after the false flag in France. Now he can use this to his advantage. He's already given a reward amount of $50 million for those who have information regarding the down jet. I wonder how many of these people are going to turn and say, you know something, I'm going to take that $50 million. Because now he can say, we're joining in with the fight with France. They were attacked and we were attacked. We're going to go into the country harder and root out the Islamic State, the terrorism that is in that country. Now, what's very funny is that the governments are saying, if we had more surveillance, we would be able to stop the Islamic State. But what the government keeps forgetting to tell everyone is that the NSA's capabilities have not been diminished yet. The truth is that we've only started to remove the mass surveillance. Only telephone spying has been limited so far. And the NSA still has a broad reach across most forms of electronic communication. The U.S. hasn't even shut down any of the NSA's controversial programs yet. And other countries are stepping up their electronic surveillance. I mean, France, in July, passed their sweeping surveillance law that expanded the country's surveillance powers. So if we believe the official story, none of this stopped terrorism. And it's expanded. And they're able to hear everything. This is how you know this is completely fake. Now, London is on high alert at this time. And they're increasing armed officers. And they're getting ready for attacks. What they're saying is that they're getting information that the Islamic State are getting ready to launch deadly cyber attacks which could take out airports, hospitals, and the electric supply. Remember what we talked about. We knew there was going to be a cyber attack coming soon. Now, right now, they're putting the fear in the people. They're trying to push the agenda of going into Syria. Remember, all of these fear-mongering that the governments do is not just for one agenda. It's for many different agendas. This is giving you a heads up that, yes, they will be hitting the electrical grid, hospitals, airports, financial system. And this is going to be coming to the private Western central bank countries. And remember, Canada, with their new election, Trudeau, he's saying he's going to remove his Syrian forces. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some type of terrorist attack in Canada to get him saying, okay, we need to keep our forces in Syria. We'll have to keep an eye out for that one. We're already getting information that the Paris false flag attack might have hurt the Eurozone economy. Remember, the central bankers do not want to be blamed for this economy falling apart. Right now, the European Central Bank chief economist says, yes, there are downside risks to the Eurozone economy. And we're seeing them right now after this false flag attack. We don't see the economy doing as well as we thought. Look how everything is playing into what we thought was going to happen here. Right now, the FBI, CIA, and all the other ridiculous agencies are out there saying, this is just a test. The big event is coming. Well, we know that already. And they're saying that we could see this in multiple cities. What they're doing is they're preparing everyone. They're preparing everyone for a multiple attack situation. They're preparing everyone for a cyber attack. And they mentioned many different cities. Now, of course, the Islamic State, taking their instructions from Israel, the United States, and other nations, have given us different places. Michigan, Connecticut, Nevada, Georgia, Maryland, Arizona, South Carolina, North Carolina. And like I said, if they were going to do something, they were going to have to do it in a horrific, huge way. It will be a physical attack in many, many locations. Remember, Israel has been practicing using a dirty bomb in the desert. It's going to be nuclear. It will be chemical. There will be cyber attacks. This is to put the fear not just in the U.S., but throughout the private Western Central Bank countries, to get them into this next war. This is where we're headed. And we already see President Obama changing things up a little bit here. He's saying that the Islamic State is not a traditional military opponent. He wants to relabel them. They are not a terrorist group. No. They're violent extremists. He's saying that basically these are violent extremists, and what they're doing in Syria is that they've carved out part of the country, and it is a state. It is the Islamic State. And they're saying the area that they control and govern is separate and apart from Syria. And he says it has all the attributes of a governing body, and it is a separate state. He is making the case of why they can go into these areas, and they can explain it away by saying, this is not part of Syria anymore. This is governed by the Islamic State, and we can go into this area. They are trying to carve off areas of Syria. We'll see how this works out, and this is the approach they are taking right now. And we know that all of this is going to happen. I mean, they can pretend, they can tell you that everything is fine, they can say the economy is not collapsing, but everything that we talked about is coming true at this point. And you need to be prepared for what is coming. Actually, John Kerry gave a time frame of 6 months. I wouldn't be surprised if this is the real time frame. If you've been preparing, continue to get your food, get your water, get your medical supplies. Make sure you have a weapon on hand. Keep cash, keep gold and silver. Of course, don't tell people where it is. If you need to get other medicines for people who have diabetes, heart conditions, or anything else, make sure you have this on hand. Make sure you have batteries, because in certain parts of the country, the electric will go out. If you're just getting started, you can use lifereliance.com. They have bug out bags, water filtration system. They have emergency food. You can customize your order. Everything is ready to go. But whatever you do, you need to be prepared for what is coming, because this is just going to accelerate, and it's just going to get worse. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.